That's my husband over there, I heard Julia's voice carry across the gallery, deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear, but supposedly not for me. He creates these massive ships, impressive engineering, sure, but it's just math and physics, you know? Function over form. The poor dear would never understand why this rusty nail carries more cultural significance than his largest vessel ever could. Laughter rippled through her circle of black-clad art collectors, all clutching champagne flutes and nodding sagely at my wife's assessment of my intellectual limitations. I stood frozen by the gallery entrance, the weight of 20 years of marriage suddenly feeling like an anchor, dragging me into the depths. 3 hours earlier, I'd rushed from my studio to make it to the opening of Julia's latest exhibition, Deconstruction, the Poetics of Industrial Decay. I'd canceled a video conference with Norwegian investors to be here, men who controlled budgets larger than some countries' GDPs. I'd even worn the ridiculously overpriced designer suit Julia had insisted I needed for her world. Now I watched as she performed for her audience, using me as the punchline. The centerpiece of the exhibition was indeed a rusty nail mounted on a white pedestal, illuminated dramatically, with a price tag of $175,000. $175,000 for a piece of oxidized metal you could find in any abandoned building. And here I was, feeling like the fool for not getting it. I walked toward her slowly, my footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. The conversations hushed as people noticed my approach. Julia's face shifted from animated storyteller to practiced gallery owner smile, not yet registering the cold fury in my eyes. "Alex, you made it," she chirped, leaning in for the customary cheek kiss. I remained still, my body rigid. "It's over," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "What's over?" Julia laughed nervously, glancing at her friends who were now finding their shoes or the ceiling suddenly fascinating. "This marriage, us, everything." I held her gaze. "I've spent 20 years supporting your vision, defending your work to my colleagues, my friends, my family. And this is what you really think of me?" Julia's smile faltered. "Alex, you're being dramatic. It was just a little joke. These people understand. I understand perfectly now. You've made it crystal clear." I turned to address her audience. "Enjoy the rusty nail, everyone. It's apparently worth more than 2 decades of marriage." As I walked out of the gallery into the crisp autumn evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: freedom. The shock on Julia's face would replay in my mind for months to come, but in that moment, all I felt was the sudden lightening of my shoulders as I shed the weight of her constant condescension. I barely made it to my car before my phone started buzzing with Julia's calls. I silenced it and drove home. Our home, the brownstone she'd insisted we buy in the trendy arts district, despite my hour-long commute to the shipyard. The place had never felt like mine, decorated as it was with Julia's important pieces that I wasn't allowed to touch or apparently fully comprehend. That night I slept in the guest room, listening to Julia's tearful apologies through the door. "Alex, please, it was just banter. You know how these people are. They expect a certain performance. I was playing a part." "The part where you genuinely believe I'm an uncultured technician?" I called back. "That's not fair. I've always supported your work." "No, Julia, you've always tolerated my work while making it clear you think it's beneath your artistic sensibilities. Well, I'm done being your Philistine husband prop. You're overreacting. One comment and you're throwing away 20 years? I opened the door then, looking at her tear-streaked face. It wasn't one comment. It was the last in an endless series of comments, looks, dismissals. I design vessels that explore the ocean depths, save lives in storms, transport crucial supplies to disaster areas. You sell rust to rich people and call it commentary. The hurt in her eyes shifted to anger. How dare you? My work challenges perceptions, forces people to question their assumptions about value and meaning. So did what I did tonight, I replied, closing the door again. In the morning, I called my attorney before Julia woke up. By the time she emerged, bleary-eyed and clearly expecting a contrite husband ready to apologize for overreacting, I was already packing a suitcase. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice small. "What does it look like? I'm leaving." "Alex, this is ridiculous. We need to talk about this like adults." "We're past that, Julia. I've already called Patricia." "Your lawyer? You called your lawyer before talking to your wife?" Her voice rose an octave. "I'm not interested in being manipulated back into a relationship where I'm the perpetual punchline." "So that's it? 20 years and you're just walking out over one stupid comment?" I zipped the suitcase closed and finally looked at her. "Do you even hear yourself? You're still minimizing, still refusing to acknowledge that you've been undermining me for years. And you know what the saddest part is? I don't think you even realize you've been doing it." "That's absurd." "Is it? Remember the dinner with the Harrisons last month? You introduced me as the guy who makes big boats while describing your own work as exploring the intersection of materiality and cultural discourse. Or the fundraiser at the museum where you told the director I wouldn't be interested in joining the conversation about abstract expressionism because I think in straight lines. Or last Christmas, when you gave me that book on art appreciation for beginners in front of your entire family." Her face flushed. "Those were jokes, Alex. Lighthearted banter." "No, they weren't. They were small, constant reminders that you consider yourself intellectually superior. Well, enjoy your superiority from now on. I'm done being the butt of your jokes." I walked past her with my suitcase, pausing at the door. "I'll have the rest of my things moved out next week. My lawyer will be in touch about the separation." "Where are you going?" she called after me, panic finally breaking through her composure. "Somewhere I don't have to apologize for what I do or who I am." The legal separation was swift, but not painless. Julia fought viciously for our brownstone and my shares in my marine architecture firm. Her lawyer, a shark in an expensive Italian suit, argued that her cultural contributions had enhanced my professional reputation, entitling her to a percentage of my future earnings. They're actually arguing that her displaying a urinal on a pedestal last year somehow increased the value of your hydrofoil designs, my attorney Patricia said with barely contained disgust as we prepared for another negotiation session. I laughed despite myself. That exhibition was called Fluid Dynamics, ironically enough. "Well, she's about to experience some financial fluid dynamics," Patricia replied, shuffling papers. "We've documented 17 instances where she publicly disparaged your work to potential clients. That nail in the coffin, pun intended, was recorded by 3 different people at the gallery that night." 3 people recorded it? I hadn't known that. "Oh yes, one of them was Elliot Tanner from Maritime Monthly. He was there researching an article on innovative hull designs and heard the whole thing. He sent me the audio file with a note saying he'd always found your work brilliant and was appalled by your wife's characterization." Ultimately, the settlement left me with my firm intact but our savings decimated. Julia kept the brownstone and her gallery. I moved into a Spartan apartment overlooking the industrial part of the harbor, a view Julia had always despised for its vulgarity, but that I found endlessly inspiring. The evening after the divorce was finalized, I stood at my new apartment window, watching container ships navigate the harbor lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Julia. "I hope you're satisfied. The gallery is struggling without your financial support. Was that your plan all along? To destroy what I built?" I didn't respond. I hadn't paid a cent toward her gallery in over a year. Its struggles had nothing to do with our divorce and everything to do with the scathing review it had received in Artforum 3 months earlier, questioning the intellectual honesty of Julia's curation. The critic had described her latest exhibition as empty provocation masquerading as insight. The art world was nothing if not fickle. The next morning, my office receptionist forwarded a call that would change everything. "Alexander Reed," I answered, expecting another client concerned about the impact of my divorce on our ongoing projects. "Is this Alexander Reed?" The voice was clipped, efficient. "Speaking." "My name is Sarah Chen. I represent a client who wishes to discuss a commission with you. Are you available to meet tomorrow?" "I'm in the middle of 3 projects at the moment," I replied, which was a lie. My firm had lost 2 major contracts during the divorce chaos. "What's the nature of the commission?" "My client prefers to discuss that in person. He's willing to pay a consultation fee of $50,000 for a 2-hour meeting, regardless of whether you accept the commission. I nearly dropped the phone. $50,000 for a meeting? May I ask who your client is? Emerson Gray. The name hit me like a physical blow. Emerson Gray, the reclusive tech billionaire who disappeared from public view 5 years ago after selling his quantum computing company for a sum that had made global headlines. The man was a legend, rumored to be living on a private island or in an underground bunker, or, according to some of the wilder theories, in a secret space station. Mr. Reed, are you still there? Yes, sorry, tomorrow works fine. I hung up and immediately called my lead designer, Nadia. I need you to pull everything we have on Emerson Gray, I said without preamble. The tech billionaire? Why? Because I'm meeting with him tomorrow, and I need to understand what I'm walking into. Nadia whistled. Seriously? There are rumors he's building some kind of sustainable tech commune in international waters. Is that what this is about? I have no idea. Just send me everything you can find. That night, I pored over the material Nadia had compiled. Gray's early career was well documented. Brilliant computer science student, Silicon Valley prodigy, founder of a quantum computing company that had revolutionized encryption. Then, at the height of his success, he'd sold everything, donated billions to climate research, and effectively vanished from public life. The last confirmed sighting of him had been 3 years ago at a remote oceanography conference in Norway, where he'd apparently spent hours questioning researchers about deep-sea currents and marine ecosystems. There were unconfirmed reports of him funding private research vessels and sustainable technology experiments, but nothing concrete. What did a tech recluse want with a marine architect? The meeting location wasn't an island, bunker, or space station, but rather an unassuming warehouse at the edge of the city's former manufacturing district. I was escorted through a series of security checkpoints by silent, efficient personnel before being led into a vast open space that had been converted into what could only be described as a futuristic think tank. Emerson Gray didn't match his mythic status. He was shorter than I'd expected, with unruly salt and pepper hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to be calculating complex equations even as he shook my hand. Alexander Reed, your hydrofoil designs for the Arctic research vessels were brilliant, he said without preamble. The way you solved the ice sheet interference problem was elegant. Thank you, I replied, surprised he knew about that project. It had been a technical triumph, but hardly mainstream news. I'll get straight to the point, Gray continued, gesturing toward a holographic display that shimmered to life at his movement. I want to build something that has never existed before. A fully autonomous, self-sustaining research vessel that can remain at sea indefinitely. The display showed conceptual renderings of a ship unlike anything I'd ever seen. Part research vessel, part floating ecosystem. No crew? I asked, already mentally calculating the challenges. Minimal crew. The ship will operate primarily through advanced AI systems, but will host rotating research teams and maintain core personnel for oversight. And the purpose? Gray's eyes lit up. To create the world's first truly independent oceanic research institute. No government funding, no corporate interests, no academic politics. Pure science, pursuing questions too risky or long-term for traditional institutions. As he outlined his vision, I felt something stir within me that had been dormant for too long. Genuine excitement. This wasn't just a ship, it was a mission. The vessel needs to be completely carbon neutral, Gray continued. Energy harvested from waves, wind, and sun. Materials that can withstand extreme conditions while minimizing environmental impact. Systems that can repair themselves and adapt to changing ocean conditions. That's ambitious, I said, which was an understatement. It was nearly impossible with current technology. Impossible? Gray raised an eyebrow. I didn't say that. I was already calculating approaches, materials, design modifications. He smiled for the first time. Good, because I'm prepared to commit $2 billion to make it happen, with you as the lead architect. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. $2 billion? The budget is the least interesting part of this project, Mr. Reed. What I'm offering you is the chance to create something that will change how we understand our oceans. and possibly save them. As he continued explaining his vision, I couldn't help but think about Julia and her rusty nail. Here was true vision, not pretentious conceptualism, but ambition grounded in purpose, function married perfectly to meaning. Why me, I asked finally? There are larger firms with more resources. Gray's gaze was piercing. Because you understand that a true innovation happens at the intersection of disciplines. Your designs don't just solve engineering problems, they anticipate human needs, environmental concerns, and future adaptations. Also, he added with the ghost of a smile, I read about what happened at your wife's gallery. Anyone who can walk away from that situation with their dignity intact is someone I want on my team. I felt my face flush. You know about that? I make it my business to know everything about potential collaborators. The project I'm proposing will take 3 years of your life, minimum. I need someone who stands their ground when it matters. 3 years. A clean break from my old life. A chance to create something genuinely revolutionary. When do we start, I asked. Gray's answer was immediate, right now. Within a week, I had assembled a core team from my firm, the best minds I had, people who wouldn't flinch at seemingly impossible challenges. Gray provided access to specialists in fields we'd never worked with before, marine biologists, climatologists, AI experts, sustainable material scientists. Our workspace was the converted warehouse where I'd first met Gray. The central area had been transformed into a massive design studio with state-of-the-art modeling technology. Surrounding this were specialized labs for testing components and materials. The North Wing housed living quarters for team members working late, which soon became most of us, most nights. Gray was heavily involved but not controlling. He'd appear at odd hours asking penetrating questions that often sent us back to fundamentals. He didn't tolerate excuses, but had infinite patience for genuine obstacles that required rethinking. If it were easy, he'd say, someone would have done it already. The first design challenge was the hull. Traditional shipbuilding materials and methods wouldn't work for a vessel meant to operate autonomously for years without maintenance. What if we looked to nature, suggested Laylo, one of the marine biologists Gray had brought in. There are organisms that survive in the harshest ocean conditions without deteriorating. This led us to study everything from shark skin to whale biomechanics. We developed a composite hull material that mimicked the self-cleaning properties of shark dermal denticles while incorporating structural elements inspired by mollusk shells. The propulsion system was another seemingly insurmountable challenge. Conventional engines were out of the question for a zero-carbon vessel. Solar and wind power weren't reliable enough for continuous operation in all weather conditions. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: jellyfish locomotion. One of our junior engineers, fresh out of graduate school, suggested a system of flexible, undulating panels that could extract energy from ocean currents while simultaneously providing propulsion. It's biomimicry on steroids, I explained to Gray during one of our weekly reviews. The ship doesn't fight the ocean, it becomes part of it. Each solution bred new problems, of course. The flexible propulsion system required materials that didn't exist yet. The self-cleaning hull needed microscopic fabrication techniques beyond current manufacturing capabilities. The AI navigation system needed sensors that could function reliably in conditions that would destroy conventional electronics. But with each obstacle, our team grew more determined. We weren't just building a ship, we were inventing an entirely new relationship between human technology and the natural world. 6 months into the project, I received the first of what would become many attempts by Julia to reinsert herself into my life. Alex, darling, her email began, as if our divorce had been a minor misunderstanding. I've been following rumors about your new project with Gray. It sounds fascinating. I'm curating a new exhibition on technology as art and would love to feature some of your concept designs. Perhaps we could meet for coffee to discuss. I deleted it without responding. A week later, my assistant forwarded a call. Alex, it's Julia. Did you get my email? I did. And the exhibition is gaining a lot of attention. The New York Times is doing a feature. I'm not interested, Julia. But this could be huge for you. This is exactly what I always told you, that your work could transcend mere engineering and become culturally significant. I'm offering you that platform. I couldn't help but laugh. Now my work is culturally significant. What happened to just math and physics? I never meant goodbye, Julia. I hung up, but the calls and emails continued. As rumors about the Gray project spread through maritime and tech circles, Julia's attempts to associate herself with it grew more persistent. She began telling people she was consulting on the artistic elements of the project. She tried to contact members of my team. She even showed up at the security checkpoint of our facility one afternoon, claiming she had an appointment. Gray, when informed of the situation, was characteristically direct. "Is she a security risk?" he asked. "No, just an annoyance. She's trying to leverage the project to revive her fading art career." "Then she's irrelevant. Focus on what matters." And I did. As the project, now officially named Odyssey, moved from concept to detailed design, my world narrowed to the endless cascade of challenges and breakthroughs. Days blurred into nights, weekends disappeared, holidays went unnoticed. The only marker of time was progress, how much closer we were to solving the next problem, to turning the impossible into reality. The design phase gave way to prototyping. We converted part of the warehouse into a massive water tank for testing hull sections and propulsion components. Another area became a materials lab where we refined our biomimetic composites through endless iterations. Gray's resources seemed limitless. When we needed specialized equipment that didn't exist, he had it built. When we needed expertise we didn't have, he found the world's foremost authorities and brought them to us. And through it all, the Odyssey evolved from concept to reality. What had begun as sketches and theories took physical form in components, systems, and finally a full-scale construction plan. The construction itself would be the greatest challenge yet. No existing shipyard had the capabilities to build what we designed. Gray's solution was characteristic of his thinking. He purchased a struggling shipyard outside the city and retrofitted it with cutting-edge fabrication technology. As the Odyssey began to take physical form, the maritime industry took notice. Speculation ran wild. Competitors tried to infiltrate our team. Government agencies made inquiries about potential applications. Gray deflected them all with a simple message. This is pure research. The technology will be open-sourced once proven. 18 months into the project, Julia made her most brazen attempt yet to associate herself with our work. I was leaving the facility late one evening when I found her waiting by my car, looking both out of place and uncomfortably familiar in her designer coat and carefully tousled hair. "Alex," she said, as if we'd parted on amicable terms, "you look good." "What are you doing here, Julia?" I kept my distance, keys clutched in my hand. "I heard about your project with Emerson Gray." She smiled, the same smile she'd used to charm gallery patrons and potential investors. "Very impressive. Everyone's talking about it." "I'm not at liberty to discuss it." Of course, she waved dismissively. "I just thought, well, we always worked well together, didn't we? Your technical skills, my artistic vision. This project of yours could benefit from some aesthetic direction, some cultural context." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. The audacity was breathtaking. "You think I need your help to make my work culturally relevant?" I finally managed. "Alex, don't be like that. I've always appreciated your talent, but this is a chance to create something truly significant, beyond mere engineering. With my connections in the art world, we could position this as a statement piece, a floating installation that transcends—" "Stop," I held up my hand. "Just stop, Julia. This isn't one of your gallery stunts. This is serious work with serious purpose, and I don't need your cultural context or your connections." Her expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. Do you really think you can navigate the intersection of technology and culture without someone who understands both worlds? Your little boat might be technically impressive, but without the right narrative, it's just metal and machinery." Goodbye, Julia. I unlocked my car and got in, closing the door on whatever else she might have said. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of her in my rearview mirror, standing alone in the parking lot, looking smaller than I remembered. The following week, I received a formal cease and desist letter from my attorney to Julia, warning her against making any further claims of involvement with the Odyssey project. It was the last I heard from her directly, though I occasionally caught whispers of her attempts to ingratiate herself with members of Gray's wider circle. The project continued its relentless pace. The first major system test exceeded our expectations. The biomimetic hull performed better than our models had predicted. The energy harvesting systems proved more efficient than we dared hope. The AI navigation and adaptive control systems showed a level of integration with the ship's physical systems that bordered on the organic. "It's almost like it's alive," Nadia commented during one test. "That's exactly the point," I replied. "We're not building a machine that fights against natural forces. We're creating something that exists in harmony with them." As the Odyssey took shape in the retrofitted shipyard, it began to attract attention beyond maritime and tech circles. Environmental organizations expressed interest. Scientific institutions inquired about research opportunities. And inevitably, the art world took notice. The head curator of the Modern Design Institute contacted us about featuring the Odyssey's design process in an upcoming exhibition on biomimetic design. Gray left the decision to me. "It's your creation," he said. "You decide how it's presented to the world." I agreed to provide selected materials, early sketches, evolutionary design models, material samples, but insisted on maintaining complete control over the narrative. This wasn't about art or cultural commentary. It was about function, purpose, and a new vision of how technology could work with nature rather than against it. The Institute accepted my terms. The exhibition was scheduled to coincide with the Odyssey's official unveiling at the International Maritime Innovation Conference, 3 years after my first meeting with Gray. As the date approached, the pressure was immense. Final systems integration proved more challenging than anticipated. The AI that would essentially be the Odyssey's brain and nervous system required extensive calibration. The bioregeneration systems, living components that would help maintain the ship's ecosystem, suffered failures that sent us back to the drawing board multiple times. There were heated arguments, sleepless nights, and moments when the entire project seemed on the verge of collapse. Gray remained steadfast, continuing to fund our work even when projected costs exceeded original estimates. "Innovation isn't linear," he told the team during a particularly difficult period. "If it were easy, someone would have done it already." 10 months behind our original schedule, the Odyssey was finally ready for sea trials. The launch was kept private, just the core team and Gray himself, standing on the dock as the massive vessel glided into the harbor for the first time. I held my breath as the ship moved away from the dock under its own power. This was the moment of truth, when all our theories, designs, and prototypes would either come together or fall catastrophically short. The Odyssey moved with unexpected grace for its size. The undulating propulsion system gave it a fluid motion unlike any conventional vessel. The hull seemed to merge with the water rather than displace it. The solar collection arrays track the sun automatically, adjusting their angle to maximize energy intake. But it was more than its technologies that made the Odyssey remarkable. There was an undeniable harmony to its design, a sense that every element belonged precisely where it was. It wasn't just a collection of innovative systems. It was a coherent vision realized in steel, composite, and glass. As we watched it move gracefully through the water during its initial trials, one of the marine biologists on our team whispered, "It's beautiful." It wasn't a comment on aesthetics alone, but on the perfect marriage of form and function we had achieved. The sea trials were successful beyond our expectations. The Odyssey's systems performed flawlessly. Its energy efficiency exceeded our models. The AI navigation systems integrated seamlessly with the human operators. Even the living quarters, which I had insisted be designed with psychological well-being as a priority, received praise from the test crew. Gray was typically restrained in his public reaction, but as we reviewed the trial data in private, he said simply, "You've created something extraordinary, Alexander." It was the validation I hadn't realized I needed. The public unveiling was scheduled for the International Maritime Innovation Conference. It would be the Odyssey's formal introduction to the world, and anticipation within the industry was already building based on rumors and speculation. 3 days before the conference, I received an unexpected message from Patricia, my former divorce attorney. "Thought you should know," her message read. Julia is telling people she consulted on the artistic elements of your project with Gray. She's planning to attend the unveiling with some influential art world figures. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the same sensation I'd experienced that night at her gallery. But this time it dissipated quickly, replaced by something closer to pity than anger. Julia was doing what she had always done, attempting to insert herself into narratives where she could claim some form of superiority or influence. I forwarded the message to Gray's head of security with a brief note. Not a security threat, but a potential nuisance. The response came within minutes. Noted, will ensure appropriate measures. I didn't ask for details. I trusted Gray's team to handle the situation with discretion. The day of the unveiling arrived with perfect weather, clear skies and calm seas, as if nature itself approved of what we had created. The conference center overlooking the harbor was filled to capacity with maritime industry leaders, environmental scientists, tech investors, and media from around the world. Gray, who rarely made public appearances, had agreed to present the Odyssey himself, with me joining for the technical explanation. As we prepared backstage, he seemed unusually tense. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just remembering why I usually avoid these circuses," he replied, adjusting his rarely worn tie. "But this," he gestured toward the harbor where the Odyssey waited. "This deserves to be seen." The presentation began with Gray giving a brief overview of the project's genesis and vision. Then it was my turn. As I stepped to the podium, I scanned the audience out of habit and froze momentarily when I spotted Julia in the third row, surrounded by several recognizable figures from the art world. She smiled at me with practiced charm, as if we were collaborators rather than exes who had parted on the worst possible terms. I refocused and began my presentation, explaining the key innovations that made the Odyssey possible. The audience responded with growing excitement as they grasped the implications of what we had achieved. When the massive screen behind me showed footage of the ship in operation, there were audible gasps. The Odyssey isn't just a vessel, I concluded. It's a new paradigm for how we interact with our oceans, not as resources to be exploited, but as living systems we are part of and responsible for. Every aspect of its design reflects this philosophy, from its zero-emission propulsion to its biomimetic hull to its regenerative life support systems. The applause was thunderous. As Gray and I fielded questions, I noticed Julia whispering animatedly to her companions, clearly trying to position herself as somehow connected to the project. After the formal presentation, the attendees were invited aboard the Odyssey for a guided tour. Gray and I stood at the gangway, greeting key figures as they came aboard. When Julia approached with her entourage, Gray stepped forward. "Ms. Bennett," he said smoothly, using her professional name rather than her married one. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "Mr. Gray," Julia beamed, "the Odyssey is remarkable. I was just telling the director of the Modern Design Institute how the biomimetic elements remind me of the organic architecture movement, a perfect example of art influencing technical design." Gray's expression remained pleasant but neutral. Interesting perspective, although I'd say it's less about art influencing engineering and more about both disciplines independently recognizing the efficiency of natural systems. He turned slightly to include me in the conversation. Alexander's team studied manta ray hydrodynamics for 2 years to develop the hull design. Nature had already solved the problem. They just had to understand the solution. Julia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Alex has always had a technical mind. I used to tell him he needed to think beyond function, to consider the cultural implications of his designs." "Is that so?" Gray raised an eyebrow. "Curious advice, considering the Odyssey has been hailed by the World Cultural Heritage Foundation as the most significant maritime cultural artifact of the century before it's even officially launched." I fought to keep my expression neutral as Julia blinked in surprise. This was the first I'd heard of any such recognition. "The Foundation is sending representatives next month to document the ship for their archives," Gray continued. "They seem particularly interested in how the design transcends pure utility to express a new relationship between humanity and the ocean. But I'm sure you knew that, given your cultural expertise." Before Julia could respond, Gray smoothly turned to greet the next group of visitors, effectively dismissing her. I nodded politely to her group and followed Gray's lead. As the tour proceeded, Julia's attempts to position herself as an insider became increasingly desperate and transparent. She loudly explained design concepts to her companions that had nothing to do with our actual process. She tried to engage various team members in conversations that implied prior collaboration. The art world figures she'd brought began to look embarrassed on her behalf. One by one, they drifted away to examine the ship's genuine innovations, leaving Julia increasingly isolated. The final blow came during the reception on the Odyssey's observation deck. The head curator of the Modern Design Institute, one of the people Julia had been trying to impress, approached me with genuine enthusiasm. "Mr. Reed, this vessel transcends categories. It's simultaneously a triumph of engineering, environmental science, and yes, design art. We would be honored to feature the Odyssey's conceptual drawings and models in our upcoming exhibition on biomimetic design." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely surprised by the offer. "That's very flattering." "Not flattery at all," the curator insisted. "What you've created here is a new definition of functional art for the 21st century. It communicates values and vision through its very form, which is what the greatest art has always done." From the corner of my eye, I could see Julia standing nearby, her face frozen in a smile that didn't reach her eyes as she listened to our exchange. "The exhibition opens in 3 months," the curator continued. "We'd want to display not just the final designs, but the evolutionary process, the early concepts, the refinements, the moments of breakthrough. Visitors should understand that this kind of creation doesn't emerge fully formed, but is the result of rigorous iteration and vision." "I'd be happy to provide whatever materials would be useful," I said. "Our design process was extensively documented." "Excellent. I'll have my team contact you next week to begin arrangements." The curator lowered her voice slightly. "Between us, this could be our most significant exhibition in a decade. The intersection of cutting-edge technology and environmental ethos expressed through pure design. It's exactly what the public is hungry for right now." As the curator moved on to speak with Gray, I finally allowed myself to look directly at Julia. Our eyes met across the deck, and for a moment, all the pretense dropped from her expression. What remained was something raw and ugly, a combination of shock, jealousy, and the dawning realization that the narrative she'd constructed about me, about herself, about art and meaning and value had been utterly shattered. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The Odyssey spoke for itself, embodying everything I believed about how function and form, purpose and beauty, technical mastery and cultural significance could and should exist in harmony. I simply raised my glass to her in a silent toast, then turned away to join a group of ocean conservation leaders eager to discuss how the Odyssey's technologies could be adapted for their work. The weeks following the unveiling were a whirlwind. The Odyssey became a global sensation, featured on the covers of scientific journals, design magazines, and mainstream news publications alike. The project was hailed as a breakthrough in sustainable maritime technology, a floating testament to what was possible when innovation was untethered from short-term thinking. Gray, true to his reclusive nature, retreated from the public eye once more, leaving me as the primary spokesperson for the project. I found myself giving interviews, delivering keynote addresses at conferences, and hosting visits from environmental leaders and heads of state. The Modern Design Institute's exhibition, Form Follows Function, The Art of the Odyssey, opened to critical acclaim and record attendance. The curator had created an immersive experience that took visitors through our entire design process, from early sketches to sophisticated 3D models to actual components from prototype testing. In the exhibition's central gallery, they displayed what they called the evolution wall, hundreds of design iterations showing how the Odyssey had transformed from conventional thinking to revolutionary vision. Visitors could see exactly how and why each decision had been made, how each problem had been solved, how function and beauty had been achieved simultaneously rather than as competing priorities. The wall's centerpiece was a quote from my journal during the project, blown up to cover an entire panel. "True innovation isn't about choosing between utility and meaning. It's about recognizing that at the highest level, they are the same thing. Perfect function has its own profound beauty. A thing that perfectly fulfills its purpose speaks to something deep in the human spirit. The recognition of harmony, of rightness, of problems solved not through compromise, but through deeper understanding. I hadn't even remembered writing those words, scribbled during a late-night design session when we'd finally solved the propulsion system integration challenges. But seeing them displayed so prominently, I recognized the truth in them. Not just about the Odyssey, but about my entire approach to my work and my life. Julia attended the exhibition opening. I hadn't expected her to come, but there she was standing alone in front of the evolution wall, reading my words again and again. She looked smaller somehow, diminished not by failure but by recognition. The recognition that she had fundamentally misunderstood what I did, who I was, and perhaps most painfully, what art itself could be. I approached her quietly, not out of malice, but because I finally felt free of the anger that had driven me since that night at her gallery. "Hello, Julia." She turned, startled. "Alex," she gestured vaguely at the exhibition around us. "Congratulations. This is impressive." "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Finally, she said, "I was wrong about your work." It was more than I had expected from her, an admission that must have cost her considerable pride. "It wasn't about my work," I replied. "It was about respect." She nodded slowly. "I thought I understood art. I thought I understood what mattered." She looked up at the evolution wall again. "But this? People are calling this a new definition of art for our century, and it's engineering." "It's both," I said. "It always was. The categories were artificial." Another long silence, then, "Your rusty nail is in storage now. The gallery closed last month." I felt no satisfaction at the news, just a strange sense of completion. "I'm sorry about the gallery." Oh, she searched my face. "Yes," I said and meant it. "It was important to you." She looked away. "I'm curating a small exhibition on technical art for a university next month. Modest, but a fresh start, maybe." She hesitated. Would you be willing to let me display some of the Odyssey's preliminary sketches? The ones that didn't make it into this exhibition?" The request surprised me. It wasn't an attempt to claim credit or association this time. There was a genuine humility to it that I'd never seen from her before. "I can send you the files," I said. "There are thousands of iterations that didn't make it here." "Thank you." She started to say something else, then stopped herself. "You created something remarkable, Alex, something that matters." As she walked away through the crowded gallery, I felt the last lingering threads of our past finally detach and drift away. There was no triumph in watching her go, no sense of victory or revenge fulfilled. Just the quiet recognition that we had both found our true paths, however painful the separation had been. Later that evening, as the exhibition closed and the last visitors departed, I stood alone in the main gallery, surrounded by the physical manifestation of 3 years of work, struggle, and breakthrough. The Odyssey itself was already fulfilling its purpose, currently deployed in the South Pacific, where its research team was documenting previously unknown deep-sea ecosystems. My phone buzzed with a message from Gray. "Ready for the next challenge?" I smiled. The Odyssey had never been the end point, only a beginning. There were other vessels to design, other problems to solve, other harmonies of function and form to discover. "Always," I typed back.